Hello and welcome to episode 206 of the Clean Energy Show. I'm Brian Stockton.
And I'm James Whittingham. This week, political leaders in Canada are fighting about carbon pricing. They're too dumb to know what they're fighting about, so why not a stupidity tax, I ask?
Volvo has produced their last diesel-powered vehicle and shipped it straight to a museum. That seems like a great idea. So after today's podcast, James will retire to a local oddities museum, and I will host the show with the vastly superior AI version of James, the JamesBot 2100.
Looking forward to it. Speaking of dumb politicians, how often do you hear that China is building new coal plants every week? Turns out they're actually not using them, just like the brains of the politicians.
Ooh, good one. Australia has introduced their first ever rules for vehicle emissions. What's next? Laws to stop Australians from throwing another shrimp on the Barbie?
All that and more in this edition of the Clean Energy Show. And, of course, there's a lot more on the show this week. Too numerous of things to mention. At the end of the show, we have the lightning round, which goes through the week's headlines in clean energy and transportation in brief. And how are you, sir?
Yeah, I'm good. Let's get right to it. I want to play Jeopardy.
Jeopardy? All right, here we go.
Auto Parts 800?
It's what Tesla calls the place you stick the charger into. Ford and GM have agreed to use Tesla charging tech in their EVs. That's just called the port, the charge port.
Silence, Brian, is depressing.
Well,
you think these nerds would be driving EVs? These would be the first adopters. If you're on Jeopardy, you should own an EV.
The question was, I don't know, it was worded kind of strange because the second half of the question was just about how the other car makers have agreed to use the so I was thinking it might be NACS, but of course that's way too complicated. It's just the charge port, but I might have gotten that wrong.
No, I hear you. That was a bit weird. Did you get the new full self-driving software from Tesla downloaded? Because everyone's talking about it on the internet.
Yeah, so I have that. Yeah, the new FSD 12. So this is the newest version, and it's all neural networks now. They've gotten rid of any of the hard coding. It's all neural networks. And I've been driving around a bit. I don't know
what that means, Brian. First of all, full self-driving is what FSD stands for, and it's their version of the software that you pay, what is it now? 15,000 Canadian, 10,000 American?
Something like that. And there's subscriptions as well, which I'm not sure. But I bought mine a long time ago. We got it on our original Model 3. And then when we bought the Tesla Model Y, we had it transferred. So, yeah, I've driven it around a bit. It is a big improvement. It's a lot of fun.
Because you never used it very much because it was so frustrating, right? It wasn't worth your time.
It wasn't worth my time to do it. But I've used it a few times now on short little trips. And there's still disengagements, but a lot of those are just like I hate looking like an idiot on the road. So if the car is like driving too slow or something, or if there aren't proper lines on the road, sometimes it drifts a little bit too far to one way. And then I just take over because I don't want the other drivers to think I'm an idiot. But it is vastly better. It feels very human-like. It tends to kind of creep forward, and it's almost like you can feel it thinking. So, yeah, I think it's great. It's a big, big improvement.
How many years has it been? Because it was this time of year when you and I tested it on a trip to 7-Eleven. Has it been 3 years now?
Well, I bought it about 3 years ago, but then I think you and I tested it maybe a year after that. So I think it's been about 2 years since you and I drove it. So, yeah, we should take another stab at it. I don't know if we bother to film it or not, but yeah, we should do it.
Well, we'll run audio in case there's any screaming, and we'll play that back on the show. But the company is behind this because they're not only including a free month of it with every purchase, they're also insisting that people get trained on it. Is that true? Like there's some sort of training that goes with it?
Well, if you're picking up your Tesla, they want the salespeople to drive around with you and give it a go and give you some training in it. And I got it on my Model S as well. They sent me an email saying, hey, you get a 30-day free trial. So I have it on my Model S as well, which I didn't pay for it. But I haven't tried it on that one, but, hopefully this week.
Well, it should operate about the same because they're fairly, within a year of each other.
Yeah, my Model S has the hardware 4, but the Model 3, I believe, only has the hardware, the Y has the hardware 3, I think.
Okay, so you have improved hardware. That might be
different
interesting
hardware.
then. That might be worth trying out on, especially if you do it on the same route. Did you have a disengagement this time?
Yeah, I've had disengagements, but like I said, like a lot of them are really just, you know, I got nervous. I did it first when there was a bunch of snow around because we got some fresh snowfall. And that was impressive because it drove down my whole street, even though it's completely covered in snow and there was obviously no lines visible. But then going around a couple of other curbs, I got nervous because I couldn't see where the curb was. So again, I took over because I didn't want to bash the curb, because if I couldn't see it, then the car probably couldn't. But
No.
Of course, I don't know because I took over. I didn't want to risk it.
Yeah, and that, in my opinion, is where high definition mapping is useful, but Tesla refuses to use that at this point.
Well, yeah, I guess there is some mapping involved, but I've never quite understood how it works. But it's seeing the speed limit changes sooner. That's really nice. So when I come up to the school zone, where it's only 30 kilometers an hour, it switches to 30 like way before I get there. That was always a problem. It wouldn't see it until too late, and then you'd be speeding through the school zone. So yeah, lots of improvements. We should go for a drive.
Okay, that sounds good. It's, you know, here's why self-driving is important and automation. It's because we believe that this will take over the world, and most miles will be driven in this way. And because of competition, because of economics, they'll be electric, so they'll be cleaner. It'll be a cleaner way of doing things, and we are looking forward to this. And every time there's a setback with EV adoption or bad news, I think, well, I wish this would get going, because that would take over things. Because, you know, conceivably, people pay, you know, over $100 a month insurance. I do. I think I pay $120. You probably pay more for your Teslas. And you could get a subscription to do all the driving you want for that much. And, you know, 20 years from now, it might even be a fraction of that. It might be pennies per mile. And that's, you know, it's just car ownership has become less of a thing with the younger generations as we go along. And with the Uber, you know, and Lyft going on, that's become a thing. So young people are driving less and are owning cars less. I think it's 10% lower now than it used to be. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Brian put a video on Twitter that wasn't my video. I made a clip of sort of an At Issue panel that we have on CBC in Canada. If you're from Canada, you're probably familiar with it. Thursday nights, they have commentators, basically columnists from different newspapers, talking about the day's politics. And I put together a 1-minute clip of that. Then I captioned it because, you know, the internet needs captions for some reason. I don't know why, but it makes a big difference. And I got nearly 100,000 views on Twitter. I mean, that's unheard of. It wasn't my video, but that's just unheard of. Like, you know, I think I might have gotten 50,000 before, and that was a big deal. You know, it doesn't, you know, nothing, 250,000 on TikTok is nothing. That happens all the time for us. And I see there's a giant cat that has decided to take over your podcast.
We have a visit from the Clean Energy Show cat, Calypso, but
yes.
I'm going to put her down now.
Okay. Calypso has decided to take over the podcast, which is good. How would you describe her? White, a little bit of orange,
It's a calico cat.
Yeah.
Calico.
Very clean cat. You know, she grooms herself well. Is it a woman, a girl cat, or a boy cat?
Female cat, yes.
Female cat, okay. Well, anyway, this video that got so much traction, and it is well over 100,000 on all of our platforms. The premier where Brian and I live in Saskatchewan is against carbon pricing, because we have that in Canada, and it is forced by the federal government. If you don't come up with your own plan, there's a handful of provinces, including ours, who are forced to go under the federal program. And I love it because I actually don't pay much carbon tax because I don't burn much carbon. I drive EVs. I have solar panels on my roof. I live in a passive solar house that doesn't burn much natural gas. I'm laughing all the way to the bank because they give you all that money and more back in advance. And yet, Brian, there are protests in the streets. They are blocking highways. And my dummy hairstylist said, you know, if you could explain the carbon tax to me, I'll give you $1 million. Like, how could it possibly work? You get the money back. And yet these people are protesting to the streets because it's an upfront cost.
Well, this is your chance to explain it then, because a lot of people don't understand how it works.
Well, it's a tax. It raises the price of something. So your perceived cost at the pump is, oh, gas prices are high. I'll buy a hybrid or an EV, or maybe I won't buy a 5-ton SUV that, requires tank treads to go down the street. Maybe I'll buy something more efficient. That's how it works. And it's been proven to work.
But then we get these rebates. The federal government sends out rebates that are supposed to cover your costs for the carbon tax. And so that's what confuses a lot of people. We get checks, we get free money. And so people don't understand, well, if we're just getting all the money back, how is this possibly working?
And yet they're in the streets protesting because their gas went up 13 cents or whatever, 13%.
Ignoring the fact that they're getting these rebate checks.
It's a per ton of pollution tax or levy. No, it's not a tax, it's a levy. Don't write letters. It went up $15 per ton. So you're paying per ton for tax. Now, our electricity here comes from coal and natural gas. Fossil fuels make up the majority of our systems here and our utility. So, we pay tax on that because the government's going to, charge them to clean up their grid. So it'd be cheaper for them to clean up the grid if they have to pay more money for burning coal. So maybe you throw up some solar panels and save some money because you don't get taxed on that or levied on that. So it works, and it's the cheapest way of doing things. But our premier, we have oil here, does not want anything to do with it. But he made a total ass of himself talking to a parliamentary committee, which people said, don't do that. Why are we having these conservative premiers? Well, they made a total ass of themselves. And this is the At Issue clip that I played, and it's about a minute long. Have a listen.
The Liberal members of the committee put up a big fuss about why are you inviting these conservative premiers to come and appear before us. I actually think it probably did the Liberals more good than harm by a country mile, because what you saw on display there with each of them was just an absolute parade of nonsense. You saw how completely dishonest they were about the costs of the carbon tax, and whether basically just once again ignoring the rebates that are available that for 80% of households, as the parliamentary budget officer has found makes them more than whole. But also when they were asked for their alternatives, it was just fantasy. It was well, maybe we could amend the Paris Accord. Or maybe we could get China to reduce its consumption of coal, or maybe we could get other countries to accept to give us the credit for the carbon reductions they made by using our liquid natural gas rather than claiming the credit themselves. Well, why would they do that exactly? Was not answered. Or my favorite, the topping it all was Scott Moe the day before, who was when he was asked alternatives, said, well, we looked at all the alternatives and they all cost more than the carbon price.
Yeah.
Gosh, I wonder what we should conclude from that.
That was Andrew Coyne, who is a columnist for the Globe and Mail national newspaper in Canada. You also heard laughing there Chantal Hébert. She's a columnist for the Toronto Star. I've been watching Chantal for years. I didn't know she could laugh. She was killing herself. She could barely hold herself together at how ridiculous Scott Moe, our premier, was in his childish arguments against carbon pricing.
And the final kicker is that everything else is more expensive than what we're doing, and yet they still don't want to do it.
It's just the stupidest thing ever. And of course, it's the same people who are part of the trucker convoy who are out there protesting because they don't like the federal government. The federal government who makes women equal, who makes progressive things that they don't understand about the environment, and who made them wear masks and things like that. That's the backlash. So, yeah. And also this weekend, moving on, I watched the movie Tar with Cate Blanchette. That was an Oscar-nominated movie from last year that I didn't get to right away. By the way, I don't want to give reviews, but I did quite enjoy it, and I thought the Cate Blanchette performance was one of the finest movie performances I've ever seen in my life. Big fan of good acting, and that was quite a thing. So she plays a ruthless person who's a conductor, but she's also lives the lifestyle, and it's about I would say it's about fame and power and corruption of your power that you have as a famous person or as a person who just has power in the arts. And yeah, she lives in a fast lane. She drives a Porsche Taycan EV, and we have a clip. That's the clip. It's very quiet.
Well, we've seen in the past, they've actually added engine noises, like combustion engine noises, to EVs in movies in the past, because they would have thought that the audience would be confused.
If you go to the IMDb page, it'll have, you know, movie goofs that nerds like to point out mistakes. Well, they pointed out when she lost her mind later in the movie and went, you know, ballistic driving down the street, that there was engine noise added, but it wasn't. It was actually the Porsche engine noise that is added itself. Like a lot of these premium cars will add engine noise so that you have some feedback from your flooring it.
EVs, they do make some noise on their own, but yeah, a lot of the EV companies have added these extra noises, which you can turn on and turn off, and they often have give you different choices. But just an addendum to that, Porsche is planning to retire their gas-powered Boxster and Cayman in the EU sometime in the next year, to prepare for electric versions of those, the Boxster and the Cayman. So those are coming to an end very quickly in the EU and will be replaced with electric versions of them.
People like Porsche are in an odd situation with the adoption of EVs, because EVs can be so fast. In fact, some of those big trucks, the pickup trucks, are faster than the eco versions of some Porsche 911s. Not all of them. There's many versions of them. And Tesla was deceptive about that because it's been proven wrong later on in tests that their launch of the Cybertruck towing a Porsche beat a Porsche. Well, it was only for the first half of the race that they did that.
Quicker off the line,
Yeah. But still, it's impressive. And, when you buy a pickup truck, you don't expect to have sports car performance. So that's kind of a cool thing about, if you do have a truck, then it can go fast if you're merging into traffic or something.
But you're right. They are in a weird position because obviously people love those Porsche performance cars. Like, they're obviously known for that. The 911 is legendary, and the engines are, the gas powered engines are legendary, and EVs are quicker, but they're in a tough position of giving up their heritage that so many of the gearheads love.
They are planning on keeping combustion engines, though, because people do love them. And that's why they're trying to develop a sort of a synthetic gasoline, a renewable gasoline or fuel.
Yeah, they're looking at that for jets as well. It is possible to make sustainable fuel that can be burned, but going electric is probably the smarter idea.
So solar fences, we mentioned them on the show last week because there was a tweet of a person doing that in Germany. Well, they're back in the news now because the Financial Times did a story on it, and they quoted Jenny Chase, who is the solar analyst for Bloomberg New Energy Finance, one of the journalist groups that study this stuff and do actual analysis and publish them. Jenny Chase is known as probably the foremost solar analyst in the world. She's written several books on the issue, and she's been doing it for nearly 20 years. We talked about it on last week's show, and despite capturing less sunlight when installed upright, because normally you angle a solar panel so that it is perpendicular to the sun, wherever that sun is in the sky at the time of year. So doing it in a fence doesn't pick up as much. However, where we live up here in Canada, the sun gets pretty low in the wintertime, so it hits fairly directly to a vertical thing. And then when you have snow on the ground, it's even better because it reflects off the snow and onto the panels.
Yeah, and you can even get bifacial panels as well to pick up power from both sides. So that it seems like a great addition to, northern latitudes for that reason. You maybe have some with a normal angle and then some as a fence. It'd be great.
Well, here's the thing, Brian. Fences are very expensive. You probably haven't done a fence. I've been doing fences, and like I said before, I only do it a few boards at a time because it's $7 a board, and that gets me about 4 inches or something like that. And then you put a little, I don't put spaces between my boards for privacy's sake. So yeah, lumber's expensive, and I think it's even more so in Europe. So it's actually, the solar panels are becoming so cheap that they're using them as a building material for garden fences. And a very rough calculation, she says, suggests a solar fence could cost as little as €30 per meter for a 1.1 meter high fence. You would double that if you wanted, say, a 6-foot-ish or higher fence, maybe not even double, because that would be probably too high for regulation. But yeah, you could, that's cheap. That's as far as materials for fences go. So why not kill two birds with one stone? Why not build a fence cheaper for the same price and then get money from that fence? It's crazy.
Yeah, fences are expensive, and if you just make it out of wood, all it's going to do is rot, whereas if you make it out of solar panels, you're actually going to get some power out of it, and they'll eventually pay for themselves.
You know, I told you I've been playing around with, because Bloomberg has a story on AI architects that make the service that makes eco-friendly houses, which is right up my alley. I've been in that for decades now, and I actually bought a house like that. But yeah, you can tell it, you just tell the AI through text what you'd like. And of course I included a home theater room, but that was always disappointing. It was never quite the way I wanted it. And it just builds it for you, just like that. I mean, and then you can order it, or you can send it to an architect to review.
Really?
And yeah, it's not just AI. It's a service to help you figure out what your house is going to be made of and what's it going to look like. And, you know, I said, you know, make me a roof with lots of panels on it and the right angle for where we live. And you get to see inside the house, which is cool. And you can learn a lot of things by that. I know you had some drawings done up for your cottage once, and you get, you know, different versions of it. You can say, hey, I kind of like 15-foot ceilings. That's kind of sort of an open area there that would be very cool. And then, you know, there's things where they can even 3D print them with some concrete. 3D printing with concrete. It's the sustainable concrete. I don't know how quickly that's going to take off, but I imagine 20, 30 years from now, there's going to be a lot of homes. And one of the interesting things they said is that, you know, you have cookie cutter houses in the suburbs where all the houses basically look the same, or there's 2 or 3 versions of them. Well, they said this is going to offer, you know, completely unique houses. Every house is going to be completely unique because you can design, a child could design it if you wanted to. And then you have different options between cheap and expensive, of course. But I thought that's exciting. It's certainly fun, little fantasy to do. Brian, Tesla sales are down. They just announced them. They're 9% down year over year, according to Corey Cantor at Bloomberg NEF. That's pretty shocking because they haven't been really down, I think, since 2014. They've been a growing company. I mean, I think you can attribute some of that to the CEO and his reputation and his sort of dirtying the brand a little bit, but it's probably more than that, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, they probably should have started working on their lower cost model before the Cybertruck. So they've just had some bad timing. They should have started their advertising sooner. Like, they're just starting to advertise now, which is like, it's kind of remarkable. They were able to sell almost 2 million cars a year without advertising.
Auto advertising is big business. The companies spend a lot of money on it.
Oh yeah, it's like, you see the figures. It's like $500 or $1,000 per car is what the other companies spend on advertising. So they are starting to advertise more. They've hit just kind of a plateau because they don't have enough models. We're a couple years away from their lower cost model coming out. So I think, yeah, in terms of growth of the auto business, it's going to be fairly flat, I would say, for the next year or two, likely. Energy storage should still be going up, but you know, in terms of the stock price, I'm not expecting it to really go anywhere for another year or two when the growth comes back.
Yeah, it's going to be a while before that lower cost car comes out. And I don't know how many of them they're going to sell in North America. So that's not our car. You know, we don't, you know, gravitate towards hatchbacks. We should. But I mean, the people who want an electric car certainly want an affordable one. And a lot of Bolts, like I have, were sold. And initially a lot of Nissan Leafs were sold. Not as many as they expected, but, you know, I think the education is important. I don't know where that comes from, but there's so much misinformation, and, you know, we're doing our part.
Yeah.
But it's like whack-a-mole. It never ends, you know, it just never ends.
We talk about it all the time, but contestants on Jeopardy still don't get the EV question. So that means we have a ways to go.
Yeah, I accidentally read a comment on Twitter, which I don't normally do, this morning, and it was like, well, explain to me how the battery is going to be last and how it's environmental and blah, blah, blah. It's like, do they do that constantly? I can't do it constantly.
We explained that 4 years ago when we started the podcast, and we explain it every couple of months. And, you know, it's a whole battery management system that is different than your laptop.
And here's the thing. Start with this fact. People don't buy EVs right now, for the most part, because of environmental reasons. They buy them for technological reasons or financial reasons. Those two things are the reasons why EV sales, the first round of them, happened. Very few happened primarily. The pusher of people buying the car wasn't environmental. It was technological. And boy, and the understanding is that they're a compromise, and they are not. They are better. I love not going to a gas station.
Oh, it's the best.
And I love not getting oil changes. And I love the way the cars drive and the way they sound and the way they work and the simplicity of them and the fact that there's no chugging or moving parts or struggling. It's all smooth, immediate, and it's an amazing experience driving an EV. If you want a car, that's the way to go.
There was that one time I took a road trip to Seattle, and we were somewhere in Washington State, and we were gassing up the car, and the hose became disconnected from the gas pump, and gas spilled all over the concrete. We were very lucky that we didn't immediately explode.
It's a good thing you're not a smoker, Brian. That's all I can say.
If there was a metal part on the hose and it had hit the concrete and sparked or something, it would be game over for me.
Later in the show, I'm going to talk about a popular YouTuber named Mr. Beast giving away e-bikes, thousands of them, worth a lot of money to poor people whose lives are changed because of these e-bikes. So that's one of the stories will be coming up.
Okay, so Volvo has made their last diesel car and put it straight into a museum. I thought that this was a fantastic sign of the times kind of story.
That's where diesel cars belong in a museum, along with the steam engines.
Yeah, so Volvo was making diesel cars for 45 years, and between 2012 and 2016, diesel accounted for half of the powertrains in their cars. That was not that long ago, 2012 to 2016, half. And yeah, the final one is an XC90. It's a large SUV with a 2-liter four-cylinder turbocharged engine, and it rolled off the production line in Torslanda, Sweden, and then is heading to the World of Volvo Museum in Gothenburg. Now, I will say that they're still making diesel trucks, so they haven't completely gotten out of the diesel game. But for cars, they are completely out. They are planning to go all electric for their cars by 2030. That's the most ambitious target set for any of the legacy automakers that are talking about EV plans. It's like nearly half of all the cars sold in 2017 in Europe were diesel. In 2017, half. And that's already down to 12%. And we have Volkswagen to thank for a lot of that. Of course, the famous Volkswagen Dieselgate scandal, people actually went to jail for that. That worked for Volkswagen for cheating on the emissions tests, because you should go to jail because there's laws about these things for a reason. The health effects are terrible, and diesel has more particulate matter. I mean, there's pollution from all gas and diesel burning cars, but
diesel's by far the worst.
Yeah. And for a while there was better fuel economy for diesel cars, slightly better. And they never really took off in North America in quite the same way. It was always much more of a European thing. There was just sort of more plentiful diesel fuel around. I think that's really the reason why. But yeah, nevertheless, good news. Volvo putting their last diesel in a museum.
In 2012, when I bought my first hybrid, the Toyota Prius, I can't tell you how many diesel douches went up to me and said, "My car's better than yours for fuel efficiency and the environment." Yeah, a lot of them. And they were, I'm sure these people are still cynical about electric cars. I'm pretty sure about them because I've heard, cynicism about EVs as well. They're smart, but not that smart.
And again, Volkswagen was largely to blame for that because that's often how they marketed those diesel cars, was about the fuel efficiency, like the miles per gallon was very good.
They have to have a settlement with them. They have to buy back the car. I remember my neighbor was having their car bought back at one point, and They're deciding what to do on that. Yeah, it's unpleasant. I don't care for it at all.
Yeah.
But
And,
diesel, it kills tens of thousands of people in North America every year. Diesel. They have statistics on this. They study this stuff. And it's getting better because there's less diesel. So at some point, Brian, in Europe, you're going to find it's going to be harder to find a diesel gas pump because they're going to fade away. And then it's going to be like, wow, I have to drive 3 gas stations away to get the diesel now.
And a great incentive to get rid of it. So that story was from Electrek.
China is building more coal plants, but burning less coal. A lot of these politicians that I mentioned at the top of the show, their solution to lowering their own carbon is to get, why not get China to lower theirs? Why are they building coal plants? I see that on my Facebook feed, says the premier. Well, China is building coal plants, but they are operating less frequency with their capacity factor, a measure of how often they run at maximum power. That's what a capacity factor is. So if you have a coal plant that puts out 1,000 or 1,000,000 watts of electricity or whatever you want to call it, that's its maximum capacity factor. But maybe it's running at half that, maybe it's running at a tenth of that sometimes because solar comes online and the wind comes online, water. There's a lot of hydro in China, but they've been having droughts, so that's a problem. But they've also been having unprecedented heat waves, which means more electricity use. And then the coal starts to get burned as we would use natural gas as a backup fuel here, but they are building coal because they have coal and they have to import that natural gas in some cases. This is according to S&P Global Commodity Insights and the National Energy Administration. So in the past 15 years, it is declining. Coal use has declined from about 70% in the early 2000s to around 50% recently. So it's actually going down as a percent of the grid.
Yeah, so they were running at 70% capacity of the plants. Is that what that means?
Yes, and now they're running at 50%. So they're actually running less. Coal plants, I think 70% is about the norm because they have to shut them down for maintenance. So now they're running at about 50%, and that is continually going down month by month as more solar and wind comes online. Even though they are building new coal, they're not burning more coal. I want my premier to listen to my show here and learn something, okay? Because politicians can't be the dumbest people in the room, Brian. It never works out well when that happens. But all the smart people leave our province, and it's just left with the idiots running it now who have no idea what's going on outside their front door. They have no idea what's going on in the world.
Well, James is running for premier. You heard it here first.
I bloody well should. I don't know what party I'd run for because they're all the same. They're all idiots. They all are oil shills, and I'm done with it. So this trend suggests that even as China adds more coal plant capacity, the overall coal use could decrease if the utilization rates continue to fall, akin to a company reducing total work hours by shifting full-time employees to part-time, despite hiring more staff. That is your analogy, Brian, and that's what's going on in China. What's really going on in China. Oh, I have some mail this week. I'm thrilled to announce we have a voicemail clip. This is something that rarely happens on the show. It was my favorite kind of mail, is you can actually hear the person talk who's listening to our show.
Kind of stopped mentioning it because people hadn't sent us for a long time, but this is through SpeakPipe. This is a website where you can leave us a voicemail message. And yeah, we stopped mentioning it because people haven't been using it, but we have one, which is great.
Hello, Brian and James. My name is Sam, and I live in Carbondale, Colorado, which is a rural town near Aspen, Colorado. And I wanted to give you an update on solar panels and schools. A local school district in Basalt, which is just down the road, is putting up 5 solar arrays, and they've partnered with the town of Basalt as well. They received more than $500,000 in grant funding from the Colorado Department of Local Affairs. The partnership included 5 solar arrays located on land in front of the high school and on the rooftops of the high school's concession stand in the elementary school, the Elgeville School Bus Barn, and the Basalt Public Works Building. Depending on the property, the solar energy output of the panel will reduce traditional electric use from 11 to 92%. This is a big win, and schools are starting to hear about it, even in rural towns of Colorado. Either way, hope you could use this as a nice update for everyone to know that change is happening, and big part and thanks to your show as well. Have a good one.
Thank you for that. That's terrific.
Yeah, I'll take credit for that.
He lives in a very beautiful part of the United States. I envy him.
Yes, of course. I drove through Colorado last year to the Telluride Film Festival. It was, amazing there.
You can tell he's very content with his voice. And that's the nuance we don't get in written emails, you know.
Yeah. And so we've talked a lot on the show about electric school buses, which are a huge opportunity to clean up. We don't want our kids breathing those ridiculous diesel fumes that we were just talking about.
Inside and outside the bus, by the way.
Yeah. So that's been a big thing. It's been happening to a great extent, but we haven't heard as much about rooftop solar for schools, but it makes perfect sense. Most schools have very, very large roof areas, and let's see more of that.
That's the thing. You know, people say, well, let's put solar in schools because they have these large roof areas. They're all over the place. They're, you know, a ubiquitous thing in wherever you are, and they're spread out. But he's saying that they're putting also solar arrays on the ground as well. So they're using the school property and not using up much of it to put up solar. That's news. That's breaking news. That's a new thing to me. And it's something I didn't even consider. You know, I thought of airports. Airports have a lot of room. And, you know, if you start powering electric flight in the future, most of the airport grounds are empty because you need these vast open fields to accommodate the runways. There is a huge potential there as long as it didn't reflect to the pilot's eyes or anything like that. So this is a great news that they would put up solar arrays on the school property and on the barn for the school bus and things like that, and every opportunity. Colorado, I love you. You are showing us the way. I think politicians in Canada who come from oil-rich provinces should go down there and spend some time learning about things. And Bob also wrote us and pointed out a video series on YouTube of a man doing a solar-powered cannonball run in a Tesla. This is what he does, Brian. He stops and camps and sets up a 6 kilowatt, which is twice as what I have on my roof. So it's all these panels.
Mine is 8.7, so 6 is a lot for a portable system.
Every night he would have to set up all these panels. Well, not every night, every morning maybe, and set up all these panels and charge his Tesla. And he's trying to do this run in 20 days. And the channel is called Power of Light. Thanks to Bob for sending that to us. I did see a picture. You know, it's quite weird because I felt weird setting up one solar panel, you know, for my camper. But this guy's setting up 20 or 30 of them, using up all the space, trying to charge his car. But I guess it's an interesting experiment. If you've got a YouTube channel, it's going to do that.
Yeah, 20 days, that's not bad to completely drive on sunshine from coast to coast. That's cool.
Would you read this next letter for us?
Hi, James and Brian. Thanks for reading out my email. I love the AI-generated version of my voice. Side note, we never say top of the morning to you here in Ireland, but I thought I'd put it in as a joke. Regards, Sean from Dublin. Of course, we had his letter read last week by an AI voice with a very bad Irish accent.
Very disappointing Irish accent.
Yeah, but Sean enjoyed it, so that's the main thing.
Yeah, thank you, Sean, for writing us. Thanks, everyone, for writing us. And remember, speakpipe.com. That's speakpipe.com/Clean Energy Show. And why not write us an email? We're at cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. And hope to hear from you because we love hearing from our listeners.
Okay, on to Australia. We haven't heard from any of our Australian listeners for a while, so please let us know what's happening down under. The most interesting thing about this story, and this is from Electrek, and it's Australia introduces its first exhaust rule, but makes some of the mistakes that the U.S. did. So apparently Australia, up until now, had no rules for emissions on vehicles. That's the most amazing thing to me, that they managed to go this long without it. It says at the article that Russia and Australia were basically the two most developed
Russia, I understand,
nations.
but come on, nobody wants to be compared with Russia.
Well, you know, Australia, they got that big Outback, I guess they've got a prevailing breeze. So, the exhaust is just blowing out to the ocean. So
probably fairly clean air, I'm guessing, but I don't know for a fact, but I'm assuming that, Vancouver, Seattle, they have fairly clean air when the air blows in off the ocean.
yeah, so I assume it's a similar situation, but no, they never had any emissions rules for vehicles until now. And as a result, the average new car in Australia consumes 6.9 liters per 100 kilometers, compared to 4.2 in the US and 3.5 in Europe. So that's really bad. That's basically twice as much fuel as the average in Europe. Here in Canada, I think we're a little above the US. These are the metric measurements for it.
The carbon levy, the rebate is based on people driving 1 or 2 8-liter per 100 kilometer SUVs, which is typical of an SUV for city driving. Everybody drives an SUV or larger, so it's not surprising. But because mine is the equivalent of like 1 or 1.3, then I'm laughing all the way to the bank with my rebate. But no.
Yeah, so Canada has very inefficient cars, but it sounds like Australia's a bit worse. And basically, one of the problems here is that there's a footprint rule. So they're kind of making some of the same mistakes that they've made in the past here in North America, is that larger cars are allowed to pollute more. This has always been a fault in these rules. And so there's unfortunately some similar problems with the rules in Australia, that larger vehicles are going to be allowed to pollute more. But that's one of the reasons why we have so many giant SUVs in North America, so many giant trucks, is that the larger vehicles were treated differently in terms of fuel efficiency. And of course, they should probably be treated a little bit differently. But, this was always turned into a loophole for the car makers in North America to just pump out more large, inefficient vehicles. But at least it's a start. Australia now has their very first rules for emissions.
So the United States recently revised their plan, and they've delayed things a little bit, but they're still fairly strong in the long run for what they do. So that means that if you're a car company and your fuel emission standards are too low, you have to sell more EVs. And to do that, you have to educate your workforce on how to sell them, which is a big problem so far. And you have to educate consumers of your product who are buying your car, and then you have to sell them at a reasonable price. So that's why these mandates are in place, is to get the adoption of cleaner cars onto the market and save lives with air pollution.
Yeah, and a quick shout out to Toyota, who is, of course, arguing against these rules. They argue against emission rules all the time.
Yeah, and we'll see where that leads them in the future company, once people finally get on board with EVs. Mr. Beast Philanthropy is giving away e-bikes to poor people in the United States. They've done this before, Brian. This is a very, very, very popular YouTuber, has something like 100 million plus subscribers. Wow. Very potentially wealthy man, but he puts all of his money back into the videos. He started, I think, one of the first videos that got him big was giving $10,000 to a homeless person. Made a video about it, made more than $10,000, made $30,000, put it back, kept doing it. It's like his own pyramid scheme. But he's also a decent person, and he started a philanthropy, a charity, and I just love watching what they do, because they bring solar panels to villages in Africa, and suddenly they have, the kids can study after dark, their schoolwork. The school has light and heat and cooking and batteries and all these things that they do around the world. They help animals. They help all kinds of things. His real name is Jimmy Donaldson. He's a prolific American content creator renowned for his generous philanthropy and captivating challenges on YouTube. They did a Squid Game reenactment, a real Squid Game.
How many people died?
Nobody died, but a lot of money was spent. Millions were spent. But then he got it all back because people watched, and but the philanthropy is great. And they've they've partnered with Electric E-Bikes. This is a e-bike manufacturer, and they're giving away 600 $600,000 worth of e-bikes, which is only $600, unfortunately, because they're $1,000 each. But yeah, he first gained significant attention for his viral stunts and giveaways, where he donates large sums of money to individuals, friends, or charitable causes, often incorporating innovative and entertaining competitions. And you don't know who he is, but he's there. And I recommend, at the very least, that you guys listen to his, or watch his philanthropy channel, because just watching, you'll donate a few cents to his charity and it'll work. And it's always entertaining. A little bit too, I could watch half-hour documentaries on the 6-minute videos he makes for his philanthropy, and I would be completely entertained because it's fascinating to me. And I think it would be to a lot of people, but he's addressing the attention span of young people, and it just goes by way too fast. But I would just love to know more about how they work. So beyond his generosity, Mr. Beast has also launched ambitious environmental campaigns, such as planting 20 million trees and removing trash from the ocean, showcasing his commitment to positive global impact. This is just a screwhead 20-something, Brian, that you would normally not give that much credit to, but he's doing good things, so he has my respect and admiration. His magnetic personality and creative content have amassed a substantial following, making him one of the most influential figures on the platform and, in fact, on the planet. Subscribe to Mr. B, Philanthropy Now on YouTube, and you'll make the world a slightly better place, I argue. So this is one person who he helped. Maria is an immigrant from Guatemala and a single mother of 2 children, and she has an arduous walk on her 14-hour dishwashing shift each day in North Carolina. There are some places that they just don't have, buses nearby. So it's just one of those things where you have to walk a long way, even just to get to the bus, and then you have to commute a long way. And, this is a big deal for poorer people. And I have a clip.
In just the USA, over 150 million people have limited transportation. That's almost half the population. And in even poorer countries around the world, lack of transportation is even higher.
A year ago, when we found out about the shortage of sanitary drinking water in Kenya, we distributed dozens of electric e-bikes to water delivery men who used to push their heavily loaded bicycles over 10 miles around the city just to make $7 a day. With their new bikes, they are now able to do a lot more trips per day, which leads to significantly more income for their families.
So yeah, that's just an example. In Kenya, people were delivering water and making money to support their families. But if you can imagine going up and down hills all day to deliver this water, the e-bike changes that. So it's something that we touch on a lot on the show, how, electrified transportation, like last mile, individual small-scale batteries like this, which are getting better, which is enabling all this, and plus a lot of investment into the tech of the motors and everything, that is really improving the world, changing the world, Brian.
Yeah, and e-bikes and e-scooters are likely to make a bigger impact than electric cars are in terms of, global reduction of emissions. It's amazing.
So another person was Conrad. He walked 4 hours every day for work, 2 hours there, 2 hours back. And he was the type of person who could work 80 hours a week, but without transportation, it was hard for him to even work 40. So yeah, it's transportation can be up to 15% of a low-income person's income, going to transportation. So if you give that 15% for food or other things, that's important. So alleviating that cost helps people get out of poverty. And most people with cars, they only do half their trips. They're only like 2 kilometers or less, half the trips in a car if you do own a car. So some people who are poor who own cars, you can save money by reducing the number of trips that you do in the car and save money on gas. Here's another clip from that video.
This is Maria, a single mother of 2 children who works for 14 hours a day washing dishes, only to send the little pay she has back to her children in Guatemala, who she hasn't seen in years.
Pues el tiempo que yo tengo aquí, ya para 5 años.
And on top of her long working hours, she still has to walk for miles every single day just to get to and from work.
This is the first of hundreds of bikes that we're going to be giving away across the country. And because this is the first one, we're going to surprise Maria with an extra $5,000 in cash. Okay, let's go surprise her. I got you a present.
Maria told us she donates whatever she has left to feed poor kids from her village back home. So on top of the $5,000, we surprised her with an additional $7,000 so that she can help her village in Guatemala. With this new bike, Maria can easily get to and from work in only 10 minutes.
Not being able to get to work or to get to school or to get to your medical appointments, it exacerbates the problems that people face, and it keeps them trapped in the circumstances that they are in.
Yeah, so that's just some good examples of how an e-bike can do that. What worries me, though, is will they get stolen? You know, what are they giving them big ass locks for these things? I don't know, because that worries me too. You can take the batteries off, but bikes get stolen, and I would hate to see the benefits to these people's lives gone.
Yeah, it could be a problem. But yeah, so many of the car trips we take in North America, if you just watch cars driving down the street, 99% of the time, there's only one person in the car. Let's start replacing some of those with e-bikes. It's finally spring. It's finally warm today. We have still some snow melting here, but I'm very much looking forward to taking out the e-bike and biking more this summer.
Me too. And I'm fearing, though, the air is going to be acrid with smoke because it's been a dry winter and a warm winter.
Keep an eye on the forest fire smoke again this summer. Okay, so moving on to another story from Electrek. China files lawsuit with the World Trade Organization against the U.S., citing discriminatory policies for EVs in the Inflation Reduction Act. So this has always been a bit of a question. We talked about the Inflation Reduction Act many times. It's a massive, massive bill that has spurred all kinds of manufacturing in the U.S. for EVs and batteries. It's really been a remarkable thing, but the U.S. has a lot of catching up to do. China was really several years ahead of the U.S. in terms of things like electric vehicles. But there's currently a lot of tariffs and so on that are keeping the Chinese EVs out of the U.S. And, they're arguing here in their brief to the World Trade Organization that these kinds of subsidies are unfair to the Chinese automakers. We've seen them making inroads in places like Australia and New Zealand. They're starting to make inroads in Europe. But here in North America, we still don't have that many choices for electric cars, mostly from the legacy automakers. They're still fairly expensive. The Chinese ones would be lower cost. And basically, the argument from the Chinese is that the ultimate goal of the Inflation Reduction Act is to reduce emissions. But if in the process you're putting up these trade barriers and keeping Chinese EVs out of the market, then are you really accomplishing the actual goal of the Inflation Reduction Act? So we'll see what happens. This was always going to be a bit of a question. Were people going to complain about the rules? Of course, Chinese EVs have subsidies of their own, and that's been one of the arguments against letting in Chinese EVs to Europe, to the U.S., is that they perhaps have what might be called an unfair subsidy. Maybe the U.S. now has an unfair subsidy. It's all, a bit of a mess that will take a long time to shake out. And really, I think the U.S. is just hoping to have a few years head start before they let in the Chinese EVs, because they need to give their legacy automakers a fighting chance that if the EVs from China got in too soon, perhaps it could be deadly for the U.S. auto industry.
Here's what would happen if the Chinese automakers were allowed to come in without any tariffs. They would annihilate the American auto industry very quickly.
Yeah, probably.
Because they're selling cars that are not much smaller than my Chevy Bolt for $10,000 US in China, and they're decent cars. They need to be up to our safety standards a bit more when they sell them overseas. So they do add some cost to them, but that's like a third of the cost of here. 20% is common, 25% is common. They can do things 25% cheaper in China. Europe adds like a 25% VAT to them. And they're under threat in Europe. They're scared, but they're not here yet. But if they start making them in Mexico, it's going to be a problem, because that can fit into the North American Free Trade Agreement. They can just ship them here. It's going to be a problem because already American automakers, the incumbents, Toyota, Honda, They're not making EVs. They haven't figured out how to make them cheaply. They are under old systems of making combustion engines and combustion parts, and they're just not able to compete with people like Tesla, who have said, okay, we want to advance the electrification of transportation, so we have to make these cheap. So their whole agenda was to make them affordable. So they started out, where can we find efficiencies? They built from the ground up. Ford, GM, they're not doing that. They can't do that. They're in the past. Everything comes to them as gravy, and they're not able to do that. So their cars are expensive, or they're losing $6,000-$7,000 on each of them. You know, the Chinese are going to come in and eat their lunch. If they could, they would, and it's going to affect a lot of things when they do come.
Yeah, and of course there would be some resistance, because there's, I think, resistance in general to, there's an idea here in North America that stuff from China is often cheap and poorly made, and some of that reputation is justified. So it would take a long time to kind of establish that trust. But, you know, the cars are so cheap. If they were able to come in without a tariff, they would be so cheap.
They're not poorly made, though.
And they're not poorly made, yeah.
But
there still would be that consumer
There will be that
resistance.
hesitance. I would have it myself. It takes time to get used to it, because you don't want, it's a big investment. You want it to be quality, right? And you need service centers around, but they're being designed by German engineers that have been picked from other companies that are working in China to make nice looking cars, and they have the manufacturing prowess to make them cheaply and make them well. They're not making crap cars.
It still surprises me when people think of Hyundai and Kia as cheap. You know, it still has a brand problem in North America.
They
a lot of people think
that
Hyundai
way, though, Brian.
They started off that way.
They did have some problems, and they've worked hard to rectify that, but it's taken them 20 years to work their way up to the top of the charts of the reliability indexes.
Yeah, no, the cars from Hyundai and Kia have been great for 10 or 15 years, but you still have some people that are hanging on to that image of when they first came out, 25, 30 years ago.
It's time for the lightning round.
The lightning round is a fast-paced look at the latest headlines in climate, clean energy and transportation.
February 2024 sales report from China shows that EV sales are at 33%. That's the plug-in market, so that includes plug-in hybrids. That was at 25% last year. It's at 33%, and forecasts are for by the end of the year to be at 40% of all sales will have a plug, and maybe even 50%. That's what's going on in China. Environmental Defense, a nonprofit based in Canada, has released a report that claims that in 2023, the government of Canada provided at least $18.5 billion in financial support to fossil fuels and petrochemical companies. The people protesting in the streets would not feel that way. I think that is BS. We should not be giving billions of dollars to petrol companies. This includes over $1.3 billion for carbon capture and storage projects, which is just a way to keep burning fossil fuels and is not an economical or sensible way of doing things, according to the experts.
The world still runs on oil for now, but that doesn't mean we have to subsidize them and give them free money.
The Biden administration announces $1.5 billion conditional dollars committed to support the recommissioning of a Michigan nuclear power plant. When finalized, the loan will finance the restoration and resumption of an 800-megawatt electric nuclear generating station in Covert Township, Michigan, which is a relatively small nuclear reactor. A lot of money for 800 megawatts, Brian. That's I could put up that much solar in my backyard. Well, not quite, but you could. China's leading electric car maker, BYD, recorded over 300,000 EV sales in Q1 of 2024. That's up 13% year over year. Remember, I don't know what the sales are compared to Tesla, but they had beat Tesla in the last quarter of last year, which was big news because it seemed like the Chinese were starting to surge forward, and some people predict that BYD will be the biggest car maker in the world by 2030. But yeah, 13% over last year, which is not a huge increase, but it is an increase. This is a CES Clean Energy Show Fast Fact. Only about 3% of the existing dams in the United States generate electricity. Didn't know that.
What?
There's a lot of dams that exist.
Are the rest of them made by beavers?
I don't think they're counting the beaver dams. I can't say for sure, but you know, if the beavers start generating electricity with their dams, they'll have my respect. A Caliber survey indicates a decline in potential Tesla buyers in the United States, partly due to CEO Elon Musk's controversial image. Despite strong sales growth last year, Tesla's consideration score dropped to 31% in February. That is down from a high of 70% in 2021. So by their measurements, he is affecting the view of the brands. Factors such as Musk's politics, his other economic concerns, and lack of new affordable models and rising competition are affecting Tesla's brand and demand, with experts predicting a slowdown in Tesla sales compared to the overall EV market growth. 60% of the 33 million EVs expected by 2030 are projected to be in suburban areas, according to a report from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory in the United States. Of the remainder, 20% will be in rural locations and another 20% will be in urban locations. So that's interesting, sort of a breakdown of where EVs are going.
Yeah, mostly to the suburbs, it sounds like, which is, of course, driving central.
Almost a fifth, 19.5% of electric vehicles sold in Europe last year were made in China. And this is on track to reach 25% this year. That's no wonder they're shaking in their boots over there in the auto industry.
Yeah, so they have been allowing Chinese EVs into Europe, and people are buying them.
Microsoft alone is operating a new data center globally. Microsoft alone is opening a new data center globally every 3 days.
What?
These power-hungry operations will together consume more than 480 terawatt-hours of electricity, or almost a tenth of total U.S. power demand by 2035. And that is up from 4.5% in 2025. So it'll be 4.5% in 2025, and 10% of the U.S. electricity will be for Microsoft data centers. And let that sink in.
I don't think of Microsoft as needing as many data centers as, say, someone like Google. So imagine if that's the figure for Microsoft.
Well, here's the
Google.
thing. Microsoft is part of ChatGPT, and that is taking off. I've used it for designing a house, right? I mean, those are heavy consumers of electricity. Yeah, so that's something that we've been talking about this year. One of these new things that is creeping up, the incredible electricity use of data centers, and especially with AI being a high consumer of it. Yeah, you worry about EVs crashing the grid. Well, these people are talking about building their own nuclear reactors for their ChatGPT. That's incredible. U.S. power production in 2023. Let's have a look at that. Rooftop solar, that's solar just on rooftops, was 2% of all electricity in the United States. That's amazing.
That's fantastic. I wouldn't have guessed it's that much. Just on people's houses, 2% of U.S. electricity.
It's a lot more in Australia. Where I think 30% roughly of all households have solar on the roof for different reasons. Utility PV, that's big solar farms that you would see put up by the power utilities in the countryside, was 4.3%. So that's only a little more than twice of what was on roofs. Wind was 11% of U.S. electricity, and hydro was 6.2%. Curbside EV charging pilot in New York City seems to be a success. In 2021, the city signed an agreement with Flow. That's my favorite charging company, because they have plug and charge for my car. I can just plug it in and not have to use a credit card or anything. It just charges my car. In 2021, and they're a Canadian company, in 2021, the city signed that agreement, and it specializes Flow in curbside chargers. It's one of their big parts of their business. So they signed this agreement to install and maintain 100 of them for the pilot program. The installations were completed in January of this year, and the street spots for the general public cost $2.50 per hour. This is for level 2 charging. So this isn't your super fast charging, huge connection to the grid, lots of money, almost as much as gas. It only costs $1 per hour overnight. So I kind of see myself, if I was living in an apartment in New York, I'd have to come down before I went to bed and plug in the car. But at the same time, plugging in the car once a week might make it last all week. I might only have to do that once, but you would be tempted to try and do that overnight rather, because it's, a fraction of the cost. They're located in all 5 boroughs, with the majority of them in Brooklyn. This is from the International Energy Agency. In the last 10 years, the CO2, the carbon dioxide intensity of global GDP, has fallen 20%. Thanks to energy efficiency improvements and the decline of emissions intensity of the global energy supply. In other words, less coal, more renewables. So the percent of CO2 in relation to GDP has fallen 20%, which is pretty good, even though it's going up.
No, there's always been a concern that if emissions are dropping, then the economy is dropping. But, that is no longer the case.
And finally this week, Indian Railways. That is the organization that does railways in India. Indian Railways plans to become a net zero emitter by 2030. Why is that important? I'll get to that. Most of India's electricity is generated from fossil fuels, primarily coal, but the energy mix is improving fast. Indian Railways is India's largest consumer of electricity. Can you believe that?
Wow.
The railway. And it wants to be net zero by 2030 in 6 years. By comparison, other major railways in the world, like Deutsche Bahn in Germany, have a net zero target of only 2040, and Amtrak in the United States, 2045. So Indian Railways is creating from scratch as much renewable capacity as a small European country, Brian, including 5 gigawatts of solar parks. That's like 5 nuclear reactors worth of solar parks in the countryside just to power rail. The transportation is truly remarkable, and most of the rail is electric now. So, that's really come a long way, especially considering the country isn't all that affluent yet.
All right, well, that is it for our show this week. Take the time to contact us. We're at cleanenergyshow@gmail.com, and around social media, you can find us at Clean Energy Pod and also somewhere on SpeakPipe.
Speakpipe.com/Clean Energy Show. You can find videos of our show on TikTok and YouTube, including special content not featured here on the podcast. The Clean Energy Show store is linked in your show notes, where you can buy t-shirts and other stuff and display your pride in our podcast. We thank you for listening. If you're new to the show, as many of you probably are, please remember to subscribe to our show on your podcast app, because that way you get new episodes delivered every week. And we do this every week, Brian, and we could probably do it twice a week because there's so much going on in this space and it's so exciting. We'll see you next week.
See you next week.
The Clean Energy Show.